My name is Alicia Doyle. I'm an award-winning journalist and the author of Fighting Chance, which is about my boxing career. I started boxing at age 28 in the late 1990s when only about 400 women in America were competing. I won 2 Golden Gloves championship titles, and my book, Fighting Chance, which came out in 2020, has won 3 awards since it came out, which I'm very grateful for.
Well, thank you so much, Alicia, for sitting down with me today. I am so excited to talk to you about all the things you mentioned in your introduction and even more. I'm also a little excited that I'm sitting in a boxing ring right now. I think this is my first time in a boxing ring.
It's super cool, isn't it? It has great energy, right?
Totally. I feel very powerful
Yes,
in here.
yes.
But before we get into all of these exciting things, what do you think people's first impression of you is?
Oh, wow. Without me speaking, just upon first appearance, they might assume I have all my stuff together, that I'm confident, that I'm secure. I put on a good front, and that's included in my book. But you know, deep down, I suffer a lot from trauma and things that I'm overcoming. It's still from childhood, and boxing became my salvation. Boxing was something that helped me attack those demons in my head from long ago, bring them to the surface, and face them head on. But I put on an air of confidence, and for the most part, I normally feel that way. But I'm human like everybody else, and I don't always feel that confident. It's a daily battle, but I think we all fight every day. From the minute we're born, we're fighting, and that's the point, is you got to stay in the fight, and the only way out is through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like that. The only way out is through. 100% agree with that. You know, you talked about people's first impression, thinking you have it all put together, and deep down you don't feel like you do all the time. But like I said, let's start with being a kid. And where are you from, and how did you get to box?
Oh, sure. Well, I was born in California, but in 1970. But in 1971, there was a huge earthquake. So me and my family, that was when my mother and father, mixed family, came together. We all moved to Colorado. So I was raised in Colorado, in a small town. It was beautiful. There's 4 seasons in Colorado. You got, snow and rain, so that was lovely. But it was rough because my parents split up when I was pretty young, and they were madly in love, but like a lot of love stories go, their love got turned upside down. So it was a pretty highly volatile divorce, and that made it hard. My mother struggled raising 3 kids alone, and I still loved my father so dearly, so it was very hard going through that at the time. And in the 70s, there was not a whole lot of support for children of divorce. Nowadays, it's very common. It's common for people to talk about it. There's not a whole lot of shame. But when I was growing up, part of my heritage, my background is Chinese, and in a Chinese family, it's very shameful to get divorced. So my mother was faced with that, in the 70s when that occurred. So that was hard on her. But yeah, those things were rough, being the Latchkey Kid and also being of a mixed race. I was in a white town. I was the only person of a mixed race in my school. That was rough. And then, I was that fat kid in school, which a lot of people don't know about me. So everybody knows, who's the fat kid in school? Well, I was that kid. So that compounded it as well. But I didn't get into journalism until later, and then journalism is what led me to boxing.
Okay, so what led you to journalism?
I had always loved writing ever since I was a child, but I never liked school very much. After high school, I knew I had to do something. I didn't want to go to college because I felt like college was just a bigger version of what I didn't like. The structure, there were a lot of things about it I didn't like, but I knew I had to do something. So I signed up for some classes at Los Angeles Pierce College, which is a community college, and one of the electives was journalism. I needed an elective, so I thought, journalism, what the heck, I'll give it a shot. So I went to a meeting, all the students, introduction to see if they wanted to try the journalism class, and the editor-in-chief, who was a student, and this was a student-run newspaper, he stood up and he talked about the press and the power of the press. And one of the first things he said was, if you want to be rich, don't become a journalist. If you want to be liked, don't become a journalist. And a lot of people got up and walked out. I stayed. He was talking about, but if you want to make a difference, you want to change somebody's life, you want to be righteous and fight for justice, that's what journalism can do. Journalism can save a life. And when people are really in trouble, they don't call lawyers, they don't call the cops, they call the press. And I wanted that power of influence, and I wanted to make a difference.
That's a beautiful and noble reason to do a quote-unquote job and to serve a purpose. Now, what would have been your favorite project you got to work on as a journalist?
Oh gosh, and people ask me that all the time, and I love that question. I have literally at this point in my career written hundreds of thousands of stories, and I loved every one of them. But my favorite stories are the ones of people overcoming great odds, the kinds of things that most people would crumble underneath. Those are the focus, the stories that I love to focus on because of their empowerment and how they came through on the other side. The only way out is through. But there's too many to pinpoint one specifically, but there's one particular story. It's a couple out here in Simi Valley, Ishmael and Cheryl Tesperati. And Ishmael was a real hotshot producer, director, brilliant man, and then he came down with Lou Gehrig's disease in his 50s. And people who don't know what Lou Gehrig's disease is, it basically robs you of every motor function you have, but your brain is fine. So you're locked in this prison. And Ishmael, the only capacity he had, the only motor skill he had was he could blink one eye, and that was it. And his wife made this alphabet chart and figured out a way for Ishmael to communicate with the blink of one eye, one word at a time, one sentence at a time. And he wrote a book that way called One Blink at a Time. That gives me chills just to talk about it. Ishmael died a couple months ago, but he lived much longer than his prognosis. They told him he had a few years to live, and he lived well beyond that. But that story of overcoming and this love story of a couple, I think it's remarkable that they stayed together. I don't know how many couples would be able to endure that kind of loss of everything he was in terms of his physicality, but they stayed together until the day he died. And that just really touches my heart, because those are two people that are the epitome of strength and the epitome of overcoming and true love. I don't know any other true love story other than that one that's that poignant.
That definitely touched you. I can definitely see it in your face, like the impact that learning that story had on you. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the boxing. How did you start boxing? What made you want to start boxing?
I love that question too. So I need to precede this by saying, before I boxed, I viewed boxing as the dark side. I didn't want to have anything to do with it at all. So that said, I was working in the newsroom alone one night, and the phone rang, and I was the only one there. I was working on a story, so I answered the phone, and it was a community activist in town telling me that there was a boxing gym called Kid Gloves for at-risk youth that was destroyed. And now this was in 1990, so El Nino came through and flooded quite a bit of things, and El Nino destroyed Kid Gloves here in town. It broke through the roof, everything was destroyed. Robert Ortiz, the owner of the gym, he had boxing memorabilia, priceless memorabilia, the rings, the bags, everything was completely destroyed. But the minute that caller told me boxing, I turned off. I wasn't even really paying attention, and I said, look, I'll pass it on to a sports reporter. I don't really report on boxing. And she said, you don't understand what I'm telling you. This was a gym for at-risk youth, and these kids have nowhere to go. And the minute she said that, it pulled at my heart, because I thought, okay, at-risk youth, nowhere to go. And these are kids who are troubled. They got some serious problems. They're one or both parents are incarcerated. The kid themselves might have some substance abuse problems, be under house arrest. There was a lot going on with these kids. But Kid Gloves was the one place that they could go and receive unconditional love and support. They could train for free if they did their homework. They had to be clean and sober, no swearing. And they were in a gym in a clean and sober environment with all these champions. So, it did something to them. It changed them. So that's what really appealed to me, was how could something that I viewed as so dark, the sport of boxing, change these children and make them better people? So that piqued my interest. So I reluctantly went on this assignment to meet Robert Ortiz at the destroyed gym. And I had all sorts of preconceived notions about this guy, thinking he was maybe going to be a womanizer or a jerk, or that he was going to be foul-mouthed. And I could not have been more wrong. Robert Ortiz is one of the greatest gentlemen I've ever met in my life, and so were all the men that I met in boxing and all my coaches. So the size of Robert's heart really touched me too, and I thought, okay, there's something to this. I got to figure this out, because I was curious. So I reported on that gym for a few months. He ended up reopening on another spot of town. I attended that reopening and covered it. So I reported on the gym for about a year, interviewing the children, interviewing their coaches, their parents, and really getting to see how boxing changed their lives. But I had yet to try it myself. Robert Ortiz had long wanted me to try an aerobic boxing class, and it's no contact boxing. You're just hitting a bag for an hour, and I just scoffed him off. I didn't really take it very seriously. And then one day I had a pretty volatile breakup with a boyfriend who punched me in the face with a closed fist more than once. Needless to say, I was pretty angry about that. I was very angry. I was ashamed. I was angry at myself for allowing myself to get into a relationship where a boy beat me. I was just ashamed to tell anybody. I certainly didn't want to talk about it. And that's a shame that a lot of women face when they're victims of violence from the men that they love. So the next morning, all I wanted to do was hit something as hard as I could over and over again, because I was so angry. So I showed up at the gym that night, and my eyes were swollen. I'd been crying all night, and Robert had gotten to know me during that year, and he didn't push. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't push. He just said, "Why are you here? You know, what's wrong?" I said, "I'm here to take your class," and that was it. And he gave me a pair of gloves, and I took a bag in the front row, and I hit that bag for an hour, and all I knew was that I felt better. For that hour, all the pain in my heart and all the demons in my head and all the shame I felt, it was gone for that hour. Probably because the workout was so bloody difficult that I had no room in my head for anything else. But the next thing I knew, that made me feel so good. I was coming back, and I was taking 2, 3 aerobic boxing classes in a row, 5 days a week. That's how angry I was. So that's how it started. And from there, I wanted to learn more. The aerobic boxing wasn't enough. So I started watching the trainers and the coaches and the fighters in the gym. And I would listen to their coaches, and I would mimic how they trained. I'd go off on the corner, I would do it on my own. A lot of it was self-taught until the coaches stepped in. And then one day, a gentleman named Stan Ward walked into the gym, and he approached me, and I kind of stood out at the time, being the only female and the one that trained as hard as I did. He approached me and asked if I ever had thought about competing. So that's what set the seed in my head.
Okay. Wow. Holy wow. And I'm sorry for what you had to experience, but look at what it led you to.
Exactly.
And the first class you took, did you cry?
I was too angry to cry.
I'm just having this vision of just all this raw emotion coming and coming through into the bag. So I was just curious.
I remember when he was wrapping my hands, I was crying. And he didn't, and I'll never forget that moment, because he didn't pressure me for answers. He just knew something was wrong. But here's a guy who deals with these at-risk youth all the time, and God knows what they're dealing with. And he doesn't push with them either. They come to us for a reason, because they think they're broken, and they're not broken. It's a matter of finding themselves again and putting those pieces back together. You
just said come to us for a reason. Are you involved with Robert in the gym now?
I am involved in Kid Gloves, yes, 100% as a coach, yes. So I am back in that capacity. I certainly don't compete anymore. I retired in 2000, but I'm a volunteer coach here, and I love the children, and they give me so much strength, just seeing them, rise up in whoever they are, and watching them master a move, or watching them come in insecure maybe in the first class, and then 5 classes later they walk in here like they own the place. So they give more to me than I give to them. But if it wasn't for them and Robert, if it wasn't for Kid Gloves, my book wouldn't exist. Fighting Chance would not exist. I never in a million years expected boxing to heal me and to become my salvation, but it certainly did.
So we'll touch on that also, but before we do, I want to ask you about, you said the kids give so much to you. Do you think that you identify a little bit with them from some of the things you discussed in terms of your parents' separation, what that made you feel as a child, the latchkey kid you touched on? Do you think that creates a bond and it makes it easier to do what you do for these kids?
Absolutely. And it was part of the struggle with writing Fighting Chance, because it only took me 2 decades to finish that book. And it's largely because I retired in 2000, and the reason why it took so long was because I was afraid to reveal the darkest pieces of myself. I was afraid to be vulnerable. I didn't want people knowing what happened to me. I don't want people knowing I was the fat kid. I underwent relentless bullying and teasing for many, many years because of my weight. And so when I became this journalist and this person and this persona, I didn't want anybody knowing anything else. But then I thought about the boxing, and I thought about what it did for me and about those kids and how vulnerable they are. And I thought, I'm not going to be able to connect with anybody unless I'm honest and unless I share my backstory. And in doing so, and in being vulnerable, I knew I could help other people by just simply being vulnerable. But that's why it took me so long to write that book, was that fear. And I'm so lucky because people have read it and it's been received so well, and people have been so kind. And the best part about it are these emails I get from people who went through the same thing or similar things, and women. I've interviewed all the leaders in my community, in this Ventura County community, and to have some of these female leaders come in and send me an email and say, I went through the same thing with my husband, my ex-husband, or it's incredible, these survivors, these women, these incredible women who just, the only way out is through.
You never know what experiences you've had that have touched others, and there's so many things like what the kids you work with are going through, what you experienced, that touch people you would never even think. And so I'm so in awe of you and the work that you're doing and the give back, not just to mention the work you put in for yourself. So I think that's beautiful. What is something that would surprise people to know about you?
Well, people that don't know I boxed, that's the first thing that shocks them. Because when as a journalist, I've never really talked about it, except for when I was in the newsroom, because I was working as a journalist while I was training and competing as a boxer. I was doing both. So I'd go to work, I'd be in, the reporter's clothes, I would call it my costume, my reporter's costume. Then the minute my shift was up, I'd go to the bathroom, I'd wrap my hands and put on all my gear and go straight to kid gloves. And that went on for a while. So fellow reporters knew I was doing it. But like when my book came out, a lot of people were like, I had no idea you boxed. I had no idea you were a boxer. So, and it's always fun to talk about, and it's been received really well. People love hearing about it. Me being a female in the sport, of course, but there's more women in the sport now than ever, which is remarkable. And women are boxing in the Olympics now, which wasn't possible when I was boxing. So to see these young girls come up and to have no constraints on them, no boundaries. They can box in the Olympics. They can box pro. They're viewed as athletes, and that's what I was fighting very hard for as a female in the sport, was that we are athletes. We are equal. We deserve to be treated as equals.
I love that. I love that the fight was in and out of the ring for yourself and others, and you're still continuing to do that today. Tell everybody where they can get your book.
My book is available on Amazon.com, and so you can certainly get it through my website, which is easy. It's aliciadoyle.com, but you can get it at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Walmart carries it as well. Yeah,
I'm definitely excited to read your book, and I'm beyond grateful for the copy of it that you gave me.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and I am even more grateful for our time here today and you sitting here in your environment, sharing your story and your heart with me and everyone that's going to watch this. As we close out our conversation today, is there anything that you want to share that we haven't touched on before I ask you our final question?
I just want to thank you for taking the time and giving me this amazing opportunity. And it's so lovely to sit across from a person and talk to them face to face rather through Zoom, because this is the first one I've done since COVID, face to face like this. So I really appreciate it. It's just lovely to have you here. And I'm so glad that you love the gym. Robert Ortiz worked very hard to make this real. And he's changing lives every day with the work that he does. And I'm so honored to be a part of that.
That's amazing. No, it's amazing. And no, thank you so much for the kind words. And the gym is incredible. It's so fun in here.
It's cool.
Well, I'll ask you, as you are out in the community here at Kid Gloves, what you've shared in your book, if you have the opportunity to hold up a sign that says one thing about you, what do you want people to know about Alicia?
Oh my gosh. I'm a survivor.